Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on this, what day is it, Tuesday? My name is Kim Poe. I'm the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library. Zoom is updated. I'm here with my colleague, Ashley Sklar, the Adult Services and Community Engagement Consultant. And we are here for our last session of our series on trauma-informed services. Today's session is on navigating trauma insights for the LGBTQ community, children, and immigrant populations. So some of the questions that folks might have had throughout our other 5 sessions about marginalized communities, sort of where they sit within the trauma-informed services spectrum might be answered today. So we're here for the last time now, right? Like this is our second trauma informed services series, so who knows? This is our last session today with Beatriz de la Espriella, who is a licensed clinical social worker. I'm not going to read through her whole bio. This is the 6th time we've had her here with us. We do share her bio on our GELS Live Guides page. I'm going to turn it over to Beatriz so we can have as much time with her as we possibly can for this last session with her.
Thank you for that. So yes, we actually have a lot to cover and a lot to talk about. Just a quick background, we are going to, or some just information, I am sharing the slides, so do not get caught up on any of the data that you see. And if you are having any questions about it, definitely review that data and information as we get through it and when you get the slides. So today we are going to cover just a bunch of stuff, but the main 3 areas that I'm going to talk about is the LGBTQ population, children, and immigrant and refugees. And within those particular sections, I'm going to talk about challenges, the type of trauma they experience, the effect that trauma has on the individual, and then also some best practices for you to support those individuals as you work with them. And then the last 2 things, we're going to do some takeaways, some final tips and things that I want you to keep in mind, what I want you to walk away with this from this presentation. And then so I'm going to jump right in. But if you have questions, please use the chat. Ashley and Kim, if you need to tell me and I'm not checking the chat or anything like that, please unmute and just let me know. And then I could definitely pause to go ahead and talk more about it. All right, so our LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning folks, we need to start with some basic terminology. That is the number one thing. We need to understand a little bit of what we're talking about. So here's some basic terminology I just want you to keep in mind. Gender identity. This is mainly how an individual perceives and thinks about themselves and what they want to call or label themselves. So is that innermost concept, could be as a male, female, or a blender of both, or neither. Gender expression, we're essentially looking at how a person presents themselves to the world. So that external appearance of one's gender identity. For transgender is an umbrella term for those who gender identity or expression doesn't match that cultural expectation or that cultural norm based on the sex that was assigned at birth. So if their sex was assigned male, but their gender identity of expression is if a female, a lot of the times that is what that individual may label themselves or call themselves transgender. A cisgender would be someone whose gender identity is aligned with that sex that they were assigned at birth. Gender not conforming, it's a broad term that refers to individuals who do not behave in a way that conforms to the traditional expectations of their gender. And then non-binary is an adjective that describes a person whose identity who does not identify exclusively as a male or as a woman. A non-binary person may identify as being both a man and a woman, somewhere in between, or falling completely outside of those categories. So they don't, the binary part, it's male, female, they don't fall into that category. It's just one or the other, A or B. So what are some of the types of trauma that are experienced by LGBTQ individuals? So these are the most common ones that we see. For harassment, it kind of covers a range of behaviors that are key. The key about harassment is that it's offensive in nature, that they're usually offensive to that individual. Um, and a lot of those behaviors are demeaning, they're humiliating, they're meant to intimidate that person. And most of the time, actually all the time, they're socially and morally not acceptable in community. Stigma, it's another type of trauma that they can experience, and is that disapproval or discrimination against them based on their own characteristics. And it could be identity or their gender expression, just because this separates them from the norm or other members of society. Violence is just any behavior that involves a physical force that is intended to hurt, damage, or sometimes kill someone. Family rejection is a big one that I do want you to keep in mind of as we talk about a little bit of the data as we move forward. Family rejection is the absence or the significant withdrawal of that warmth feeling, of that affection, of love from parents towards their children. And that rejection, a lot of the times, is based because of that gender expression or gender identity that the individual might have. And that family rejection could look like hostility, could look like aggression, it could look like indifference as well, just like not dealing with the person, not talking about it. You could have a mom and dad relationship, and dad chooses not to acknowledge the son's or daughter's gender identity. That could definitely fall into that family rejection and even negligence as well. And when I talk about family rejection, we're looking at parents mainly, but there's also that extended family could do a huge, huge impact on those individuals. Institutional discrimination is the refusing to hire or promote individuals based on that gender identity or gender expression that they have. And then one thing I want you to keep in mind of is that micro traumas or the microaggressions. Um, a lot of times people who identify as LGBTQ often experience brief, subtle expressions of hostility or discrimination. And even though they might be brief, they are definitely associated with an impact because it could be constant. So it might be just a comment that somebody says, or saying that somebody says, but when it's multiplied by multiple times, that person experiencing that, it could definitely have an impact on that individual. And it can in the long run, it's like a snowball effect, right? It can just grow and grow and grow, and it can take a toll on their mental health and even physical health, right? So it's important that we keep in mind of those, such as those micro traumas and microaggressions, as are as important as the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse that an individual may be experiencing. So let's go ahead and look at some numbers. So this is a survey, National School Climate Survey, and I focus again a lot on LGBTQ individuals. I used to be a school social worker, and so that was my biggest population that I worked with. But for school climate, this is where we see a lot of that constant impact or even the microaggressions that we see on individuals. So 68% of LGBTQ plus students felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or even gender expression. So that's a huge number. This is 2021. 68% of those students who responded to the survey felt unsafe at school. 76% experienced in-person verbal harassment, 31% were physically harassed, and then 12.5% were physically assaulted. We might think like, oh, physically assaulted, 12%. That is still a huge number. To think about an individual being punched, kicked, or injured because of how they express themselves, because of their sexual orientation. In 2012, the Human Rights Campaign created a report where 33% of LGBTQ said that their family is not accepting of LGBTQ people. 43% of those experiencing homelessness reported that they were forced out of their home because of that sexual orientation or some gender identity that they experienced. 32% reported physical, emotional, sexual abuse at home related to their sexual orientation, gender, or identity. And 4 in 10 youth reported that the community that they live in is not accepting of LGBTQ people. So, what I would like for you to, whenever you look at that number 4 out of 10, when you walk into a room of individuals, and you look at 10 individuals, 4 of those, of 10 individuals LGBTQ, 4 of those are, that's a huge number that say that they don't feel that their community is accepting. What does that say about the impact that it has on their mental health? Lesbian, gay, and bisexual LGBT youth are nearly 1.5 times, 1.5 to 3 times more likely to have reported suicidal ideation than their lesbian, gay, bisexual youth. So that is a huge indicator. So we already know that suicidal ideation is a huge, huge problem in our community for our youth. 1.5 to 3 times more likely than that appear that an individual who is non-LGBT is going to have increased amount of those suicidal thoughts. That is concerning. It's a huge, huge thing to think. A lot of LGBTQ who've experienced ongoing discrimination view the world as unsafe and that people can't be trusted, that I can't trust you. You're not someone that I feel comfortable with. A lot of LGBT youth who experience unsupportive conditions in school are more likely to have higher rates of absenteeism, meaning they're not going to school because it feels unsafe for them. They could be disciplined in school, so their behavior and actions could be seen as disruptive, so they're more likely to be disciplined. They have lower grade point averages. A lot of the times, if they're missing school, they don't understand the material, their grade point averages and their grades are going to go and drop. And then a lot of the times they end up dropping out. They have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and even low self-esteem. They're more likely than their peers to face challenges that compromise their resilience. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But a lot of the time, individuals, LGBTQ youth, are at greater risk of exposure to traumatic stress. And being exposed to traumatic stress is definitely has an impact on your resilience. The absence of an adult that supports, or in a community that supports your gender identity or your sexual orientation, can definitely be considered a risk factor that can hinder your resiliency. And the lack of control over external circumstances can definitely have an impact on how an individual is resilient and be able to overcome some of the things that they're experiencing. More in the mental health aspect of it, individuals who've experienced discrimination, violence, or maybe some lack of support are a higher risk for anxiety, depression, PTSD. We talked about suicide and suicidal related behaviors, and suicidal related behaviors talks that it could be a lot of risky behaviors, but also for suicide, it could be cutting, being able to do an attempt to, commit suicide and things like that. Substance use, even relationship issues. If they don't have a fundamental understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like as they get older and as they grow, they might be able to have some relationship issues or difficulties with their partners and even just with members of the community because as a youth, they don't have the foundation of what a healthy relationship looks like. They might be experiencing homelessness, just like I mentioned. A lot of them are forced out of their home because they're not being accepted by family members. So here's some numbers to look at, and I just kind of want you to take a look of the adults in the US with an LGBTQ status. And when I talked about adults, it's 18 and up. Um, for an individual who's LGBT, experiencing symptoms of anxiety. So if you can tell, the darker blue is an LGBT individual, the lighter blue, it's a non-LGBT individual, 18 to 20 years old. So let's look at, if you want to look at the face 3.5, if you're looking at this part right here, just want to make sure. 60.8% So that's double. So 35 are non-LGBTQ. So double the amount. So we already know that individuals, the experiencing of anxiety, it's higher, has been higher in recent years. But for an LGBT individual, it's even much higher. It's double than that. And that is like the one thing that I want you to keep in mind of. Another thing that it's interesting, it actually starts dropping with age. As you can tell, as they hit 30, 45, and 65, their symptoms of anxiety do drop. I'm curious to know if anybody has any idea of what that might be. So if you want to be able to, if you have a moment, just go ahead and type in the chat. What do you think is happening with the individual's LGBT status and their symptoms of anxiety going slowly down? It also happens with us, with non-LGBT individuals, but what could be happening here? Go ahead and type in the chat if you, there's no right or wrong to this answer. And finally, a for therapy. Thank you. Yeah. People are finding resources and learning ways to advocate and cope. 100%. Yes. So in that age gap of 18 to 29, you're definitely probably still at home. You're having, school is during that time as well. Um, your ability to have control of your external circumstances is definitely much smaller. As we get older, we have more control of what's happening around us. Mental health care is being normalized more. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. 100% being able to say, oh, I can go ahead and seek therapy and that's okay. But we're able to have control of more of our external circumstances. Lynn, as we get older, they are more comfortable with themselves and do not care as much about people think. 100%. 100%. We get older, we don't care what anybody else thinks. So that part of the youth, it's so valuable for us to support them. So we know that as they get older, the protective factors are going to increase. So they're less likely to, or they're less likely going to be experiencing those levels of anxiety. But we need to get some protective factors for our youth. So if these numbers are 18 and up, I can only imagine what's happening for our younger population, middle school age students, high school students. Those are the ones that I am very, very interested in getting to those interventions in place. And we'll talk about those in just a minute. But I wanted to highlight, Kate, people who make it through their younger years have probably found created supported community. Yes, 100%. They have found a community that supports them. This is a very similar again, but this is for depression. So mainly we're looking at depression. It's a slightly similar, but the biggest takeaway that I want you to take from this is non-LGBT individuals have percentage that is fairly high, but then an individual who's LGBT, it just makes it even higher. So those are the things that I want you to kind of keep in mind of when we're thinking about the practices and the programming that we are going to be developing to support individuals. So to justify why one group versus the other, this might be a really good reason. The data doesn't lie that there is a higher increase rate of symptoms of depression for individuals with LGBT status. They're also 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. In the US, over 1.8 million LGBTQ plus young people aged 13 to 24 seriously thought about suicide. And I think that's a very, very sad number for us to go over. How much is that individual suffering that they are thinking seriously about ending their life, about ending their and so if you don't know about the Trevor Project, I highly encourage you to check them out and add them as a resource if you haven't already. The Trevor Project is a leading suicide prevention and crisis intervention for LGBTQ plus young people. And I believe it's a nonprofit organization as well, but they provide support and they have resources on their website. I believe you're able to talk to someone if you're in those situations and you're feeling about having some thoughts about suicide, they do have that crisis intervention available, and it's 24/7. So it's a website, but I do believe that they have other resources. So in 2023, 41% of individuals that would survey were found to seriously thought about attempting suicide. 41%. In 2023, it's right around, that was what, last year. So it hasn't been that long ago that this is still happening. So this is still a huge, huge issue, and something we need to think about. So what do we do now, right? We can all agree that the data is alarming. So what do we do now? And some of you, I know all of you have heard like knowledge is power, but I do believe 100% that having the knowledge and the skills that everyone in your library needs to be able to support individuals, it's the number one strategy that you could do. And when I talk about knowledge, I'm talking about different training topics, not just trauma-informed knowledge. So trauma-informed knowledge is great. We all know about trauma-informed, but let's take it a step further and let's understand the vocabulary that they use. Like, what are the definitions that are relevant to LGBTQ individuals? What are some of the stresses that they're experiencing? Factors that we can increase and highlight. What might be some myths and stereotypes that we need to debunk? Like, what are some of the things that are happening? Invite someone from an LGBTQ population to talk to you instead of just having another individual share these things, but just get it directly from them. And then just be trained on crisis and intervention and prevention strategies. I think it's very, very important that we do that. One thing that I think it's also super important, so not just educating ourselves and having all this knowledge, increasing our self-awareness about our implicit or explicit bias. And what we talk about implicit bias is, well, the thing I want, let's do this. I do have a video, and I want to share it. And it is a very low volume video. I'm being 100% honest with you. So we tried it out and it's super, super low. So please, please bring your volume up as much as you can. I'll have a few minutes of it. If you can't really hear it, please type it in the chat and just be like, can't hear anything. And I'll just go ahead and stop it. And then that would be the end of it. But you will have a link to this. And it just explains that bias, implicit and explicit bias, as better that I can. But let me go ahead and do that right now. And
Talk about
Ashley,
bias. People
Kim,
often
please give
get
me a thumbs up
uncomfortable.
in the
The most difficult people to teach
chat.
fairness to are people who value fairness the most. People who really care about being fair often can push away the idea that there's unconscious bias most vigorously. Talk to a group of people who aren't really in the business of valuing fairness, and you can get a lot further along because you don't have to convince them that unconscious bias actually exists. So fair people, fair-minded people, people who care about egalitarian values, those individuals actually have the most difficulty with unconscious bias. Not so much that they are more biased, but they are less willing sometimes to accept the notion that bias exists and that we all have it. Now, what's interesting about unconscious bias is that it doesn't automatically make us bad people. What it does sometimes is make us do things that don't align with our value system. And the most intelligent people out there are best able to rationalize their decisions that are actually based on unconscious bias and make it seem as if they're based on something else. They're able to create an argument in their mind as to why they did what they did, so that it doesn't look like bias was the basis. So the more education we get, the more analytical we become, the more experienced we are, the better we are in creating an illusion for ourselves that we're not biased. But bias is human. It is inherently human. It's about understanding who we are and how we react to things that we're not familiar with or that we've been taught are negative or frightening. It's our mechanism for survival, but it's antiquated. It goes way back to the time where we were walking around, perhaps in jungles, and we had just a moment to determine if someone was friend or foe. If they were friend, you could sit around and have a grunting conversation. If they were foe, you better run or fight. In a global society, that type of behavior no longer applies. We can't get along that way anymore. We have to become broader in our perspective. But we still have these antiquated notions of how to.
All right, so let me get out of here. Yay, it worked. So I wanted to share that, and it's an older video. And I just want to make sure my screen's back up. Okay. It's definitely an older video. But I love it. I think she talks it's so good to understand that it's part of who we are, right? Um it's easier to get an idea to understand like this is not, it's not a bad thing. It's all about increasing our awareness more than anything else, and being aware of like, ooh, I just did something, I just thought of something about someone that maybe it's not the right thing to do. So definitely you will have this video as part of your slides for you to go back to. One thing that it threw me back is like the video's old. That means we've been dealing with this for such a long time. Like I don't know her outfit, like everything, the hair, like it looked like this is an older video. I don't know how many years back. We've been dealing with implicit bias for a while. So I just want you to keep in mind that it's very, very important for us to understand what is happening within us so that we can definitely have an idea of what our unconscious bias might look like, and also ways that we can like just learn about it more. What are some of the other things that we could do specifically within our library? So we want to create a physical space that it feels safe for individuals. The data says that they don't feel safe. We want to be able to provide a space that feels safe. Do we have poor lighting in our library? So we have poor security. Let's ask those questions. Are our areas well maintained? Are the areas well monitored? Do we have posters in our libraries that represent LGBT community members? Are our areas open and visible? Do we have safe and supportive relationships? Are we saying welcome to everyone that walks in? And are we saying good morning to everyone that walks in? So that when I talk about safe and supportive relationships, it doesn't mean that you have to become friends with everybody, but it's all about just initiating those types of conversations with individuals and let them know it's like, I see you, I'm here for you. Another thing that is very important is establishing a system of reporting discrimination, harassment, disrespect, and bullying. So if your library doesn't have a system set up, let's get one going. But also develop a policy that adds on to like, okay, we have a system of reporting. What happens after? Like, what are our procedures? What are our policies when it comes to that? And then let's establish a gay straight alliance, right? So if we do some type of programming, let's involve an individual who is from the LGBTQ population, they can speak on some of the things that could help when we're setting up a new programming into our libraries. Other strategies that I want you to keep in mind, supporting a cross-system awareness. So those agencies that you are working with, you want to make sure, are they LGBTQ supportive? Do they even have the knowledge about LGBTQ individuals? Do they have knowledge about the trauma and LGBTQ individual goes through? If you're going to be referring out to them and using them as a resource, you may want to ask the questions and just say, hey, how friendly is your facility? How LGBTQ friendly is your facility? Go visit that facilities. How does it make you feel when you walk into that building and say, oh, I actually see that there is, a flag, or there is the LGBTQ flag, or there is a poster that displays support. I like this. This is an agency that I feel like I can connect with. Okay. Another one of the biggest things that I want you to think and keep in mind is affirming and strength-based approach to all the programming and the resources that you have. What I mean by this, and this is again one of the most effective strategies for agencies to use, it's keeping in mind that an affirmative and a strength-based approach focuses on providing that safe and supportive environment, but allowing the individual to not only express their sexual orientation or gender identity, but understand them as they have gone through stuff in life and a lot of adversity, but they also have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of resources that they can provide to us. And that's what the strength-based approach is. So when you're thinking of programming, affirming number one of their gender and sexual orientation, but then number two is that strength. How can they be part of what I'm creating? right? So I'm affirming their identity, which is great, but now let's go ahead and draw on and draw out the strength that they have. Yes, they struggled, with all of the stuff that they are going through, but they're also very, powerful, and they can be empowered. They're not victims of what happened. We need to be able to talk to them as, you are a survivor. Let's go ahead and get you in here and to work with us in some of the programming that we're doing. We want to think of those individuals as capable change agents. They are capable of coping. They are capable of adapting. They are capable of resilience. We saw it in the anxiety and depression graph. As later as years goes, they're able to do those things. So why don't we go ahead and bring that out earlier in the days, instead of waiting and they're 65 and all of a sudden, they know how to cope. Let's go ahead and bring that information to them. And LGBT individuals are resilient, and they are able to overcome these challenges. So why not draw out and be able to highlight the strengths that they. All right. Want anyone that has any questions, let's go ahead and wait until the end so that I can try to get through all of it, because we do have a couple more things to go over that. All right. So talk about kids. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Here are some of the types of trauma exposure that children experience. So we have the physical, verbal, and emotional abuse, sexual abuse, labor, some adverse childhood experiences that could be the physical or emotional neglect, changes within the household, mental health. Living with somebody with mental health is a huge adverse childhood experience that could happen. Racism or discrimination, witnessing violence, or even domestic violence in the home or violence in the community, and then the sudden separation from a loved one or loss of a friend or a family member can definitely be consider a traumatic exposure to children. At least 1 in 7 children have experienced child abuse or neglect in the past year in the United States. And we know child abuse and neglect are common. It's just one of those things that happens. And we want to be able to try to include as many protective factors as we can. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So how does, I don't want to get too much into the data because I really want to get into the practices, but how does that trauma impact on the individual? Like, what are some of the things that we get to see of them? So a lot of them have a lot of learning difficulties. They have difficulty planning and anticipating what's going to happen. They have problems with boundaries, difficulty with peers, and increased medical and mental health problems. There was a story I recently read of a 14-month-old um, baby who was not growing physically, and they were placed from one foster home into another foster home. And this child was not growing like they would normally grow, and they were not having any growth. And until they were placed into a loving adoptive parents home, it's when they noticed that the growth of the baby, I think the baby was like 14 months old. So usually you see growth very rapidly in that curve. And this time, so even physical problems can impact the individual 100%. So just keep that in mind. Oppositional behavior, low self-esteem, difficulty managing rules and limits. So if you're at a library that offers services to children and they're having difficulty following the rules, think a little bit and see what could have happened to this individual, why they're behaving this way. There's something that maybe we can look at it and see more, learn more about their background and stuff like that. A lot of the effects on trauma in children is PTSD, depression, a lot of developmental speech language issues, suicide, some hidden wounds. These are some of the ones that they don't want to talk about. It's just things that have impacted them, and they don't just come out, but they're still part of them. And then chronic health problems, heart disease, obesity, autoimmune disorders, and cancer. And so if you're interested more about how chronic health problems come into play for children as they get older, definitely look at the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And I think one of the first trainings that I did, Ashley and Kim can go ahead and link into it in the chat, but one of the first trainings that I did talks a lot about that. and it even has a link to the actual test that you can take to learn about your own ACEs, your own adverse childhood experiences, a score. So you can look into that. 1 in 4 trauma-exposed children develop PTSD by the age of 18. Children with PTSD are at a higher risk of harming themselves, and then children with PTSD are 8 times more likely to hurt themselves than other children who do not have PTSD. So definitely that trauma impacts the individual in more ways than just that event in itself. There was a national survey of children's health, and I believe this was back in 2016, 2019. And just kind of one of the things that I want you to take, I don't want to go too much into this graph for time purposes. I really want to go into the strategies. But just think about that ADHD, anxiety, behavior problems, depression are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorder in children. So just think about that as being one of the biggest takeaways from this is ADHD, anxiety, behavior problems, and depression are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders that we see in children. So if you notice a behavior being of an issue, just think back of that is there's a mental disorder that potentially may be happening. And let's talk about how we can support them. So once again, I talk about trauma approach, being trauma informed. So why do I keep bringing this up? Well, community organizations play a critical, super important role in mitigating the impact of trauma. So the community itself has a huge role on mitigating that impact. Organizations that are prepared to recognize a trauma and to be able to respond to trauma are also in a better position to identify youth who may need more intensive services and be able to connect them to the agencies that can provide that support. So just being able to have that, I think it's super valuable and important. Another strategy is just see what you could do to reduce re-traumatizing individuals. I think that's very important and valuable as well. Another strategy that I want you to keep in mind is to empower them and just give them a voice and choice. Consider secondary trauma on service providers. So anyone who's working with individuals who may be exposed to trauma, let's go ahead and do something about it. Don't just go ahead and send that staff member out there and to work with individuals who have been exposed to trauma. Let's also protect that individual as well. We also want to use a collaborative approach. So let's talk about learning from them as to how can they speak up, how can they help with our decision making, how can we support them, let them tell us what they can do. And one of the biggest things that I want you to take away from this is risk factors and protective factors. So this is the other video that I'm going to share. This one I feel is definitely sound, it's better. So if it's too loud, please let me know. I mean, if I could find it. Give me 1 second. Let's get out of this one. And then once again, if I can get a thumbs up.
Risk factors for violence occur in people's lives, their relationships, and where they live. But major differences exist in how risks impact individuals and groups. We invited participants for an exercise to explore how.
If you witnessed or experienced violence in the home as a child, take a step back. If you were bullied at school, take a step back. If your parent lost a job and was out of work for several months, take a step back. If an immediate family member went to prison, take a step back.
I didn't have a great relationship with my parents growing up. They were constantly stressed and fighting, often because of money. I was diagnosed with ADHD, so I needed a lot of extra help in school, and also we moved around a lot, so I was constantly trying to play catch up.
You know, my mom and I lived in a rough neighborhood. There were gangs around, people out of work. It was tough.
The big plant in town, it shut down, and people started moving away. I felt like our sense of community is disappearing, and it affected my relationship with my friends, but mostly my wife.
There are also things that protect people from violence in all its forms at every level.
If a parent or trusted adult was available to talk to you and help you tackle everyday challenges and stressors, take a step forward. If you were involved in sports or other school activities, take a step forward. If you graduated from high school, take a step forward. If you grew up in a community that supported education, economic opportunity, and recreational activities, take a step forward.
One thing that really impacted me was a free after-school leadership program in the community we moved to and finally stayed in. They had volunteers from local organizations who helped us learn leadership skills and topics we were interested in, like technology, science, art, and media. They really cared about me and gave all of us what we needed to succeed throughout high school.
I got a new job, and I got retrained. I started feeling better about myself, and started working out things with my wife.
All right. I don't want to think we all get the idea a bit of what protective factors are. So let me go back to that because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to go over everything. All right. So risk factors are what increase the likelihood of an individual experiencing either child abuse, neglect, or just, things that are going to impact them as they grow older. Protective factors are what decrease that likelihood of experiencing that child abuse and neglect, or just the impacts, and protective factors actually aid resilience. So when it comes to libraries and community organizations, we may not have a lot of opportunities and know what to do with regards to the risk factors part of it. And we may not be able to get too much on that and reducing, like in the video, it talks about gangs and stuff like that. We may not be able to do that, but we can do the other part, which I think is super important, that aids on resilience, that supports individuals. So yes, trauma, horrible, bad, risk factors, horrible, bad. What can we do in our power to be able to support them and then help them as they grow? So if you are thinking of doing a leadership program, like the example for the girl, that was what set her apart. That was something that she was able to do. What I want you to do, and we don't have to type in the chat, but just think about it. What helped you? So if you're thinking about, oh, what can I do to help others? What helped you? If you had one trusted adult, one individual that you trusted, that you could go talk to, can you be that person for someone that walks into the library and support? All right, remember, type in any questions in the chat as we get closer towards the end. I want to make sure that I go through all of this information. Immigrants and refugees, we do have to do some terminology here as well. Immigrant is a person born outside of the United States to a non-US US citizen parent. Refugee is a person with a legal status granted. The status was granted outside the US based on having experienced some level of persecution. The asylum seeker is the person that applies for refugee status once they enter the US. So I do want you to keep in mind the difference between refugee and asylum seeker. Undocumented is a person lacking lawful immigration status. And then the unaccompanied minor, I think it's one of the biggest ones that we are noticing, which is children under the age of 18 who enter the US without an adult or without some type of legal immigration document. This is data that I found on US immigration, and there is tons of individuals here. So 1,008,345 lawful permanent residents. So that means they either have a green card, so they are able to be in the country legally. And this was back in 2022. We have 25,519 refugee arrivals. That doesn't mean that they're a resident, but they actually arrive to the state, to the United States during that time. And the table to the side, I just want you to keep in mind, is the unauthorized immigrant population. So these are estimates. So these are not specific numbers because they're unauthorized. So a lot of the times they crossed the border or they crossed with illegal status and they stayed, and we are unable to have an idea. How you read the graph really well, it's you look at the number. So back in 2021, it's not listed here, but for 2022, the numbers are based on period of entry. So if an individual entered back in 1980 to 1990, the 1,460,000 is the one that it's like listed as the amount. So just keep an eye on the numbers based on the year that they did it, and then also the period of entry on this side over here. But again, as we can see, it's like, yeah, the data is huge and is problematic. What can we do about some of these things? What is the knowledge that we have? Here are some of the challenges that they have prior to coming to the United States. So this is where some of that trauma experiences come in. Lack of food, shelter, physical injuries, infections, forced labor, lack of medical care, war. They could be the victims of violence in the home or outside of the home. But they also experience challenges during their travel or processing once they either arrive to the border or they're coming through. So a lot of them experience assault, robbery, sexual assault, harassment. They, separate themselves from the family. Maybe they're taken away. I believe there was tons of news back a couple of years ago. I think it was during the Obama administration where it started that children were being separated from their parents once they crossed the border, and things like that. So those are some of the challenges that they might be experiencing during their travel. So before they decide to leave, once they leave, but then even then, once they arrive to the United States, they might even experience some additional challenges, like language barriers, identity issues. Who am I now in this new country? What is my role? What can I do about it? On losing that social status. Some individuals who were doctors in their previous country are now having to be farmers or cut grass or whatever the situation might be. Some of the challenges, that fear of deportation, not knowing what's going to happen, and the stress of trying to be reunified with their family, So those are some of the challenges that they experience once they're here. Isolation, that's a huge one too. So I think the need of community, it's very important and vital. So strategies, what can we do, right, to support the individuals? The biggest thing I want you to take away from this is an emphasis on immediate attention to basic needs. So depending on where they are in their journey, we should always start with the understanding of where are you on your basic needs. Once that basic need is met, then we can move up, and this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that we can, go into safety, security, love, and belonging. But let's say you're trying to do a self-esteem workshop for individuals who are migrants, but their physiological needs have not been met. Like they don't know where they're sleeping tonight, or they lack employment. They're most likely not going to be attending a self-esteem workshop when their basic needs have not been met. So just want you to keep in mind of like when it comes to immigrants, let's look at the basic needs. Has it been met? And once it's met, then we can move up to the next ladder. Then we can look at health, employment, family, situation, love and belonging, and then self-esteem and self-actualization. Another thing we want to do is we want to reduce barriers. We want to be able to have access to resources in the community. We want to provide them with education and knowledge. So language, that's if language is a barrier, let's provide some level of assistance when it comes to of that. Also, let's maintain a list of immigrant-friendly mental health and substance abuse providers, interpreters, and legal resources. Not just a list of individuals and attorneys' offices that they can work with, but we want to be able to have agencies that are immigrant friendly and that can provide those services to them. Also, again, safety is super important. Where and when are services provided? When it comes to them, safety is a huge part of that transition from going to another country to from another country to a new one. So be able to have some level of calmness whenever you're having those connections or sessions with individuals. Clearly describe why you're asking for specific information. So if you sit down and just ask, like, hey, let me just have your name and address, they might be a little skeptical because they might not trust you enough to know why you're asking that information. It could be because you're just helping them with a job application, but being extra about it and saying, hey, I need your name and your address so that I can pull this information into your application. That sense of just clearly describing why you're asking for that information makes a huge difference. We want to be able to provide them, again, that choice and control, freedom to decide their own fate, because a lot of the times when they're in that transition, going from one country to another, they lack that freedom. They don't necessarily know what's going to happen next. And then the last thing I want you to keep in mind is an emphasis on protective factors. We talked about protective factors for children, but these might be a little bit different for immigrants and refugees. So some of the protective factors that they have is that they do believe in a higher power. There's a loyalty to family, strong ethnic identity, connection to the cultural origin. Doing well in school, it's a huge protective factor for them. Achieving citizenship may not be attainable for everybody, but it's definitely something that could help them. Um, and then just be able to have a supportive environment, a teacher, a coach, just even a library member, if they walk in and they say hello to you and they think that you're supportive to them and that your resources are helping them, then why not? So you could be that protective factor for them as well. All right, so here are some of the takeaways, and this is what I really want you to walk away with. Most important thing is training on trauma-informed approaches to the services. It's valuable, it's very important that we have. We also want to educate ourselves in terminology. It's not just about LGBTQ or immigrant or anything like that, but it's just educate yourself in terminology overall. We want to focus on a strength-based approaches, and that goes a long way for all three populations. We also want to know who represents your community and the population of the patrons that come into your library. What I mean by that is that if you have a higher immigrant population, then focus on that. Focus on the terminology and learning and being trauma informed on that population that walks in. Be aware of those risk factors, but most importantly, expand on your protective factors. What can you do to be a protective factor, to be able to expand on that? Because protective factors aid resilience. And then the last thing is do your research, right? Learn about the agencies that you're collaborating with and that you're referring patrons to, because that way that this is an immigrant friendly or agency or LGBT friendly agency, or that therapist that you're sending them to actually works with children and it's not just an adult only mental health facility, and things like that. So just be able to have that in mind. All right, so we've come to the end. All right, let's see. So yes, go ahead and type in any questions that you have. Chris, yes, absolutely. Citizenship is not accessible to the majority of undocumented immigrants. It is one, so even though it is a protective factor, it is something that is huge, huge. As a personal story, it took me 10 years to be able to become a legal resident in the United States. So as an immigrant myself, I completely understand that an undocumented doesn't necessarily have a pathway to citizenship as easy. And I know the DREAM Act was something that it was talked about multiple times. It got passed, but then it's always something that, depending on who is in our leadership, things could definitely change for a lot of our folks and our individuals. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Any questions that you have? Anything else that you can think of? All right. So it's all for me. So Ashley and Kim, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Beatrice. Like, you've given us so much information broken out over 6 sessions over like, I don't know how many weeks or months at this point. It doesn't really matter. It was all very helpful. As we've said, all of the recordings are shared. The other 5 already exist. We made sure to link those in every single advertisement that we had for this workshop series on the LibGuides, in our newsletters, in the weekly wrap. So we hope that people have been able to sort of keep up with those, as well as the slides and additional resources. We'll get this one uploaded. Please give us like 3 to 5 business days. The download and upload process like takes a little bit. It will be there along with the other 5. I don't know how many folks were watching the chat, but there's a lot of overlap between the information that Beatrice has shared with us today and in the other 5 sessions and other GELS sessions. Again, just in case people still don't know, GELS stands for Growing Equitable Library Services. Other GELS sessions that we have offered, like USCIS, where we've been able to provide, we weren't able to record the sessions, but we're able to provide links to resources for some of those protective factors that Beatrice has been mentioning, tools to find doctors, educational classes, forums for people who are new Americans or are immigrating to America, as well as some information on naturalization, immigration, and all of that. Also information that was shared in our public libraries and LGBTQ plus communities session, a lot of information on pronouns, just other information, language, some information shared from the ALA Rainbow Roundtable. There's overlap in all of this, and that's kind of the whole point of GELS. So we hope that folks have found this information valuable. We hope that you're able to take a look at some of the other resources that sort of overlap and interweave with this session that we have and find that valuable. You should get a survey in about an hour to let us know what you think. Help us help you. Otherwise, we're just making it up. But thank you all so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I loved being with you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, everybody.